what are we going to do for story time today? Chris, what do you think we should do for story time today? I better
Oh,
introduce you first before you answer that question. Good morning, everybody.
good morning,
Good
Rosemary. Good
morning,
morning,
good morning,
everyone.
good morning, good morning. First of all, I'd like to say good morning to my spirit guide, Grey Eagle, who is always, as always, standing to my right side. And second, I'd like to say good morning to Chris in Vermont. Good morning, Chris in Vermont.
Good morning. I can't wait for your story today. It's fantastic.
Well, have you heard it before?
I have heard it before,
Have
years and
you?
years and years ago. I won't remember all the details, though.
Well, when you're telling a story, uh, even though many of these stories are stories that I've written in my books and people have read them, but when you're telling the story, you know, and you're writing it, there's only so much that you can say about a story, and because the otherwise your book is going to, instead of it being, let's say, I don't know, 20 chapters, it's going to be 50 chapters. If you wrote all of the details of all of the stories that you've ever had, of course, you can't do that. You've got to limit it, you've got to edit it, you've got to cut it down. So I think that in the telling of these stories, even though you might have heard them before, in the telling of them, um, there's always something new, there's always something different, there's always a little detail or two that maybe you haven't heard. So where am I going with this? So good morning, good morning. It is story time. It is Saturday morning. It's a cold and rainy Saturday morning in Florida. I know all of you out there who are freezing cold in the snow are thinking, good, I'm glad she's, because I'm so tired of hearing her say how lovely and sunny it is. But it is a rainy day. Not a rainy day, it's a rainy morning this morning. It's going to be raining and dull until about 2 o'clock this afternoon, when, of course, being Florida, the sun will shine again. So, all right, I'm going to dive straight in. Good morning, and once upon a time. It is story time. So, once upon a time, as all good stories must begin. We're going back quite a way in time. I was in England, and my students, many of them were sort of just having done their 3-year training course, were now being sent out or being allowed to take their own patients, to have their own patients. So one of my students, Gerald, lovely man, and the husband of my closest friend at that time, he he was contacted, and I don't remember now how, but he was contacted by a lady, and he was asked, "My husband is in hospital. Would you please go and give him some healing?" So Gerald said to her, "Well, can you tell me, what the problem is, and so on?" And the lady explained, "Nobody knows what the problem is. They're telling me that he's dying. He's telling everyone that he's dying. But they've done numerous tests and they can't find anything wrong with him now." Her husband was, I'm going to say, in his mid to late 60s or maybe early 70s. As I've said, we're going back away in time now. Okay. So Gerald, being uncertain about things, not understanding that for some reason or another this man had got it in his head that he was dying, even though the hospital, the doctors had done tests like you wouldn't believe, couldn't find a thing wrong with him, decided that maybe he wasn't experienced enough. So he called me and he told me what was going on, and he said, "Would you please come with me to the hospital?" So off we went, the two of us. And this man was lying in bed. He was very quiet. He barely said a word. We explained that his wife had asked us to come and talk to him. There was no response from him at all. So Gerald sat in a chair in the corner of the room, and I sat on the bed and held his hand, and I proceeded to say to him, that this is what I did. I proceeded to tell him who I was, and how the healing experience was going to proceed. But again, I was getting very little response from him. And then a grey eagle came beside me, as he always does, and he said, "You need to encourage him to talk to you, Rosemary. Just encourage him to talk to you, uh, because this is a very special case." So, okay. So I started talking to him. I asked him how long he'd been married, how long he'd been in this country, because he had a very pronounced accent. And I think he was Belgian or some such, I can't remember quite now why, but I asked him how long he'd been in the country, and he told me that he'd been in the country since the war being World War II. So I talked to him a little bit about my father, and I said, my father was a soldier in the war, and he was a British soldier in the war. And as I started to talk to him about my dad, tears started to run down his face. I can't say that he was sobbing, because he wasn't, but he was extremely emotional. So I said to him, where were you during the war? And I was very gentle with him and held his hands. And I said, where were you during the war? And it was as if watching a flower opening up in a way, except it wasn't a pretty flower. He talked to me. Once he started talking, it was as if he couldn't stop. And he told me that as a very young boy, I think he was 15 or 16 years old at the time, he'd been conscripted into the German army. And in fact, he'd been subscripted into the SS. As he's telling me about it, he could barely at some points talk because he was choking up so badly. And he said, my country was captured by the Germans, and all of the young men, all of my friends, all of the young men of our country were conscripted. We had no choice. We were forced into the German army. And he broke down and started to cry. So I held him and I talked to him. And I said, there's no judgment here from me, and what could you have done anyway? You were conscripted, you were forced in, you were made to do things, you were made to fight for a country that wasn't even yours to fight for. Slowly and surely the story unfolded. All the time, the pain that this man was suffering was pouring out of him. And he told me how being in the SS, they would, part of his job was to go into the forests and hunt for prisoners. Part of his job was to take prisoners from the concentration camps. When he started talking about the flamethrowers and how he'd been forced to use the flamethrowers on dozens of soldiers at a time, explaining that some of his friends had refused and were shot by the German soldiers. They'd refused to participate and were themselves shot. When he started talking about these things, and when he started to unburden himself, it's one thing to hear these stories, it's one thing to know about these stories. And I grew up with my father being a regular in the army and being in the war. I grew up with these stories. I knew many of these stories. But to sit and listen to someone who's actually done these things. And at the end of the his tail, he was begging me and begging me to understand that he had no choice. It was either kill or be killed. We could all sit here in our living rooms thinking, well, I'd rather be killed than kill. But, you know, as we know, it's very different when you're in a circumstance. You think you're going to react one way, and very often you react completely differently. And our instinct for survival in many ways also takes over. So the horror of being killed can perhaps be worse than the horror of actually killing others. He told me that even now, all of these years and years and years later, in his dreams, he would hear the screams of the men as they were burned to death. And it became very apparent to me as he talked that this was what was killing him. There was actually nothing physically wrong with him, but he was terrified. He was absolutely terrified because he knew with absolute certainty that when he died, the devil was coming to take him because he had sinned so egregiously that he would be going to hell. As you can imagine, this took some time, and my student Gerald was sitting in the corner listening to all of this. As we talked, as I encouraged this man to talk to me, all the time I held on to his hands. And I began to talk to him about my God, the belief in my God, who I believed was not a judgmental God. My God was a kind God, a loving God, an all-embracing and all-encompassing and beautiful light, a creation of the light. That my God was a forgiving God. And he asked me, do you think that God would absolve me of my sins if I asked him? Do you think he would absolve me of these sins? And I said to him, you know, I think that if we are truly remorseful for the things that we've done, I think God does forgive us. He sat up further in the bed, finally looking me in the eyes. He said, do you think I'm going to hell, Rosemary? Do you think that the devil is coming for me? I'm so terrified that the devil is coming for me. Gregor put his hand on my shoulder and said, tell him the devil is not coming for him. God forgives. And as Gregor said this to me, I began to see a light shining around this old man lying in the bed. And I said to him, I can't see the light of God around you. The things that you did, the things that you were forced to do, the things that you were made to do, they are the things that are eating away at you. But God loves us all. And if you are truly remorseful and regretful, and if you are truly wanting to embrace God and to embrace the light, I believe that God will embrace you. He reached out and he held me, and he sobbed and he sobbed and he sobbed. And I talked to him, and I continued talking to him quietly and gently, telling him that God would forgive him. In some weird way, I felt afterwards a little bit like perhaps a priest might feel having taken a confession from someone, a true and remorseful confession. And in some weird way, I felt that it was my job to absolve him of his sins. Not that I have any power to do such a thing, but yet with Grey Eagle behind me and his angels around him, I felt that it was actually an appropriate thing for me to do. And so I said to him, God forgives you. Your angels forgive you. When you pass, God's light will reach out to you. Your angels will reach for you. There will be no dark place. There will be no hell. There will be true salvation for you. And as I talked to him, over and over, repeating those words, he lay back on the pillows. And I held his hands and I said, now I want you to sleep. And now I want you to find peace. And find peace in your heart. Because God will come for you. He closed his eyes. And I sat with him until he fell asleep. Stroking his hair, stroking his face, holding his hands, giving him as much as I could the light of love that came from God, the light of love that came from me too. Can you imagine being 15 years old and being forced into doing these awful, awful things? It's beyond imagination. As he lay back on the pillows, over and over, thank you, thank you, God bless you, thank you. I have peace, thank you. I have peace, thank you. Until finally he fell asleep. I sat with him for a little while longer, not asking any questions of God, not asking any questions of Grey Eagle. They were not my questions to ask anyway. And finally I felt I could leave him. And I looked at Gerald in the corner, who was looking at me, absolutely astounded by the experience. And we walked out of the hospital together. When we got outside the hospital, Gerald gave me a big hug. Thank you. He said to me, thank you. Thank you, thank you. I've never been able to do that myself. He has peace. We know now that he has peace. The next morning, Gerald called me to say that the man's wife had called him to say that her husband had passed in the night. No physical reasons at all. But can you imagine going all of your life with the dread and the fear that the devil was coming for you? At some point in your life, the devil was coming for you. Can you imagine the terrible fear, trying to live your life in a normal way, but knowing in your heart that you were going to hell for the things that you'd done? There are some who would say, well, he deserved to go to hell. There are some who would say, doing the things that he did, he should have chosen to die. But perhaps he didn't choose to die because he was afraid that the devil would get him no matter which way. The thing about healers and the thing about healing is when you go to give someone healing, you're not sitting in judgment. It's not your place to judge. Certainly not my place to judge. It's not your place to decide the rights and wrongs. As a healer, you just give healing. You know that God is with you. You know that the energy of God is with you. You know that the love and the care of our angels are with you. And you hope that the healing works, and you hope that you give people peace, and you hope that you heal the soul of that person, which is what healing is all about. So even all of these many, 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 many years later, so many years later, I do hope, and I do think of that man from time to time, and I do hope that God embraced him. I know in my heart that he did. I do hope that his angels came for him and that he went into the light. And I know in my heart that that's what happened. And I do know that for all of the terrible things that this man did when he was a young man, he suffered for all of his life. The horrors that abound in this world, unspeakable horrors, most of us don't know. We don't even have an inkling as to what may or may not happen, or what can or cannot happen. In my role as a medium, I see those horrors sometimes. Another time, I'll tell you another story about a little girl who suffered the worst horrors. But as a medium, even though we carry these burdens, and even though we suffer with the pain of others, and even though we are helpless in so many ways, we know that at the end, for those of us who are of God, for those of us who are of the light, for those of us who have the light within us, no matter what the horrors we suffer, God saves us. He's our hero. He comes for us. Our angels come for us. That's the way it is. And that is the end. The end. Right, Chris, have I dampened everybody's spirits? I
No,
feel that it's a very, very sad story, but yet the ending is such a beautiful story.
and I think that's what most people are feeling. Amy says, wow, such a beautiful and moving story.
I think
Cher-
so.
Cheryl says that's such a beautiful story of God's unconditional love and the effect of our own emotions on ourselves and our psyche.
Yes, yes,
Um,
exactly.
Vicky says, what an emotional story. Maggie says, what a beautiful story. Kassenija says, true evil entities do not even cross their mind that the devil would take them. They feel righteous in their evil doings.
Well, and also, I think there are many dark souls who walk this earth who are of the devil and happy for the devil to take them. They're not terrified of the devil at all because the devil is within them. So, but that's that's a topic for another day.
Giuseppe has a question.
Yes.
Um,
Good morning, Giuseppe.
Hi, Rosemary. I have read lots of your books, but there is still something that does not convince me. When you talk about souls, you often describe them as if they remain human in the way they think, they act, and they appear. Sometimes they have regrets and sadness. How can an ethereal or high energy creature keep on acting so human? Thank you. Hugs from Rome.
No, well, Giuseppe, I love these questions. And just to point out, I think we've had this conversation before, I'm not here to convince you one way or another. And I do think that it's wonderful that people do have their doubts, and, that you shouldn't just believe just because somebody like me might tell you so. All right. So, uh, if we had another 2 hours, we'd be able to go into this in a much deeper way. Suffice it to say that, and many of you've heard me say this before, we who are on this earth plane, we are what is known as a soul cluster, an earth cluster. Now, those of you who know astronomy and astrology will know that, if you look out into the sky, there are certain formations of stars. The Seven Sisters being one, the Plough, I can't remember anyway, but lots and lots of different formations of stars, which are called a cluster. Those formations are called clusters. So there are certain clusters of stars. And in the same way, it has been explained to me that there's a certain cluster which is all of those souls who are on this earth plane. We are a cluster, an earth cluster. And because we are this cluster, we don't just dissipate when the physical body has gone or has rotted away. We are still part of that cluster. We are still part of that earth cluster, and consequently still have those connections and those feelings and those emotions and the energy that we were created from, and the energy that we are created from, that each of our souls is created from, is earth energy, continually and constantly grounding us, and having all of that energy that we display as human beings. I don't know if this makes any sense to Giuseppe, or if it confuses you even more, but keep coming with the questions because we love them. Um, those beings, our soul transcending our physical body, our soul transcending this earth plane, is nevertheless part of that earth cluster, part of that soul cluster, which connects us to this earth and connects us to all of those other souls, part of our cluster, that still remain here on this earth plane. I don't know if I can explain that clearly or not, but I'm afraid it's going to have to do. We could sit and talk about this for hours, couldn't we, Chris?
Absolutely. Judith says, I am so thankful you had the compassion and the spiritual ability to help release this man from the hellish prison he had been in since the war.
Yeah.
You and Grey Eagle are a blessing for so many. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, darling. I'm very grateful for that. But remember, yes, I do have that compassion, and I do have that understanding of pain. But many of you have heard me say before that those in the spirit world will tell us the greatest gift that God can give us is the gift of pain, the gift of heartache, and that is the gift of understanding. If I hadn't had or hadn't experienced heartache or pain, or if I hadn't experienced being, sort of, let's say, an outsider, if I hadn't experienced those things, I wouldn't know how to be compassionate towards another person. So my pains and my hurts and my heartaches were what enabled me to reach out to this suffering soul, and he was truly suffering. And if you have suffered yourself, it's much easier than to reach out to somebody else who is also suffering. But fortunately, I have Grey Eagle who by my side. Fortunately, I have my angels. Fortunately, I have God by my side. So I'm not doing this alone. But also, fortunately, I do, this is going to sound weird to many of you, but I do thank God. I am grateful. I am truly grateful for the pains, for the hurts, for the tears. I don't want them anymore. Thank you. Don't give me any more. Thank you very much. But I am truly grateful for my childhood, which was lonely, unhappy, painful in the extreme sometimes. But I'm truly grateful because for those pains and those hurts, they've made me who I am today. And I do like to think that I am, for the main part, a compassionate person and a caring person.
Marlene
Chris.
says, "Wow, I will never forget this story, Rosemary, and can't wait to share it with my daughter today."
Oh, good, good. Well, you can actually. Where can people find this after we've gone live? You can then have it. You can then see the recording. You can either go to
YouTube. Everything will be on
YouTube,
YouTube.
Facebook, wherever. You can replay this. So maybe you can replay this for your daughter, or just direct her to where she can hear the story for herself. But thank you for that. I do think that it's a story that we should all share, because again, isn't it so easy for us to judge? It's so easy for us to judge other people, and it's so easy for some of us to say, well, I'd have chosen death rather than do that to somebody else. But if you're afraid of death, or if you think that hell is right there because you've already done this, or even being a part of this group of people that you're going to hell and damnation, it has to be a torment as to which way you would go. Talking of which, it reminds me, I can remember, oh gosh, so many years ago, I can remember talking to friends and talking to other couples. I can remember saying at some point, well, if I found my husband was cheating on me, I would immediately get rid of him. I would immediately, I won't tell you what I actually said, but it wasn't very nice. But so you have this idea of, if something happens to you, this is what you will do, and this is what your reaction is going to be. However, when it happened to me, and I caught him with my best friend. When that happened, I think that the betrayal, and the betrayal from my girlfriend, actually more so than my husband in a weird way, but the betrayal, and the idea of it is so overwhelming that you don't react at all the way you think you're going to react. And I know that there are so many of us, well, if that happened to me, or if I did that, or if somebody said that to me, this is what I would do. But when it actually comes to it, we don't necessarily act the way we think. So it's, be careful in how you judge, because I mean, I might have said, well, if that happened to me, this is what I would do. I might have said it about somebody I knew, judging their action. Why did she have her husband back? Why did this and this? Easy to say it all, so easy to say it, until it happens to you, and then you realize that your feelings and your emotions are so in turmoil that you don't act nearly as you would think you would. Chris.
Josephine says, "Thank you for your moving story." Marlise says, "Thanks, Rosemary. Because of you, I won't be afraid to die later."
Oh, that's so nice. I'm so glad for that. That's so lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Cheryl says, "Lately I have seen more and more people doing bad, evil things to one another. They have no remorse and think they are entitled to do as they please. What happens to people like this?"
Well, again, um, each person makes their own choice, and for each person who does something that's awful, there are consequences. It's not for me to say what those consequences would be, and most of the time I wouldn't know what those consequences are. But as I said in my story, okay, if you are at the end of the day truly remorseful, if at the end of the day you realize the things that you have done, that you are remorseful for them, and that you are a part of this, the light of God, that you want to be in that light, then you can be. Unfortunately, when we pass into the spirit world, we were talking about this the other day. Somebody said, what happens when you die? Well, you know, you embrace the light. But so many people are afraid to embrace the light, because you know what happens when you stand in the light, don't you? You see everything. And I don't think it's that other people are judging, and I don't think it's God that's judging. I think we have to look at ourselves. I know that when my time comes, of course I'm going to embrace the light. I'm going to leap for it. I'm going to be joyful to be standing in it. But I also know, you know, I've got to look at myself. I've got to examine all of those things that I said or did that I, you know, and I've got to look at and see the parts of me that I really don't like. And I've got to face up to those things, you know. Maybe I'm not nearly as nice as I've tried to be, and I'm not nearly as nice as I try to be, because hey, none of us is perfect. And I can shout at the motorist screaming down the road trying to overtake me when there's nowhere to overtake. I can shout at him and curse at him just as much as anybody else does. So, you know, so we have to face ourselves, which is not always an easy task, but at the same time, if you're sensible and if you're embracing God, and if you're embracing the fact that you are a beautiful and a spiritual soul, you are already in the process of facing yourself, and you already know the awful things that you've done and said. And it's quite funny, because there are times when I might say something, or I might be mean to somebody, even if it's only in my head. I might think something that's not very nice, and I know that they're listening. I know that they're clocking it, and and so sometimes I'll say, I know, I'm being really mean, and I shouldn't be really mean, and I'm really, really sorry. And then other times I'll think, well, you know, he deserved it, or she deserved it, or whatever that is. I'm human after all. We're all human after all. Chris.
Bridget, Bridget says, some of us who have the light of God within us act badly from time to time with anger, fear, and act out.
Of
How do
course
we
we do.
avoid the
You
guilt?
know what it's called, Chris? It's called being human.
Yeah. She wants to know, how do we avoid the guilt from these times and move forward from our failures?
Um. All right. Well, I'm not sure how you might move forward. This is my way. If I look back, one of the worst things that I ever did in my life, and I've done many things, but one of the worst things that I ever did, the thing that really comes to mind, is that I hurt my father unnecessarily by saying, just with words. And I said something to him which was really unnecessary, but very true. And even as I said it, I knew that my words had acted like a dagger. And I saw the look in his eyes, I saw the look on his face. And I knew that even though my words were true, there was no need for me to hurt him that way. He knew perfectly well what he'd done. He knew perfectly well what my words meant. He'd got his own, he's got his own guilt, his own way of dealing with things. And there was no need for me whatsoever. There was absolutely no need for me to say the things that I said. But, you know, I'm not trying to defend myself. I was going to say, in my defense, they popped out. But of course, you know, we choose to say things or we choose not to say things. So I obviously chose in that moment to shove the dagger into his heart. And I succeeded, because the look on his face was as if he'd caused him so much pain. And I think that the pain that I caused him was pain that he already had, because he knew that he should never have done the things that he did. I can't do anything about his guilt. I accept my actions. This is the way that I feel. I'm not going to spend my life feeling guilty for the things that I did. I do have remorse, and I accept that I could have been much kinder and much nicer. And so what I do, I don't hold the guilt. I determine not to do it again, if at all possible. I determine that I will think more clearly before I use the dagger of my words to hurt someone. So I am much more careful and much more aware, and try to live my life. When I do something wrong, I try to live a better way, a kinder way, and I try to be nice. There are very few people that I'm not kind about. There's one particular person I struggle with, and I do struggle. And I hear myself sometimes saying unkind and unnecessary things about this person. But when you have a person who, he doesn't hurt me, but he hurts my beloveds. So when when I find myself doing this, I'm fully aware that I'm doing it, and I'm fully aware that I shouldn't do it. Sometimes it just pops out, but I do strive to be nicer and to be kinder. And we're all human, aren't we? Chris.
Maggie says, my aunt's husband was one of the few American soldiers who were the first to enter the concentration camps, who had to help those in the camps
Yeah.
and take care of those who lost their lives.
Yeah.
He never recovered from the experience, ended up drinking, and multiple attempts at suicide. My aunt stood by him when others wouldn't.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I have been into the concentration camps. Maybe I'll tell that story. I can't remember if I did tell it already or not, but I have been in the concentration camps when they were crowded and filled with people who were dying. And I've witnessed that. Yes, I know some of you are thinking, what is she talking about? But in my way, traveling through time and space, going back and down and back and through the hole, as I call it, going back into the past. I was taken once into the ovens where there were two brothers who were in amongst a whole crowd, people jammed like sardines into this place, and they were being gassed at the time. Luckily for me, the horror of that is in some ways negated by the fact that I see beyond the horror, and I see what happens to these people, and I see the angels as they come, and I see the light, and I see the beauty of God, and I see the joy on the faces of those who moments before were suffering the horrors of the ovens, of being gassed. So luckily for me, no matter how awful and no matter how severe those things are, watching a small child, well, I won't say any more about that, but watching the horrors, being in a house fire and watching as a young father screams and screams looking for his children. Fortunately for me, those horrors are somewhat negated, not really negated, but I'm able to see the beauty and the joy of what happens afterwards. There's a story in my book, The Matter of Life and Death, and some people asked, why did you put in such an awful story? And I think it is important for us to, we know about God, we know about goodness, but I think it is important to sometimes talk about the other side of things, the darkness and the awful things that happen. And I remember in the story Matter of Life and Death, the story happened actually in Florida. I wasn't living here at the time, but I was visiting friends. And this story happened in Florida. And it's a horrible, horrible story. It's a true story. You can go to the FBI files and you can find out all about it. However, I then go beyond that horrible, horrible story. And I see what happens as we transcend beyond the pains, beyond the hurts, beyond the cruelty, beyond the fears that go on daily in our world. And I'm able to go beyond that and to see the joys and to see the incredible beauty of our angels as they lift us and carry us to God and carry us to a safe place where, you know, our life, however long we live it, we can live to 100 years old or even 120 years old. But it is only a blink of an eye in the scheme of things, in the whole scheme of things. It is a moment in time. And so those moments, sometimes horrific moments, sometimes awful moments in our lives, are also simply a blink, tiny, tiny blink. While they're happening to us, they don't seem like that, but in the bigger scheme of things, they're a blink in time. And we are able to transcend the horrors, and we're able to transcend the pains, and we are able to see and to be enveloped in the light and to have the joy of our angels and the joy of God surrounding us. Chris.
Jane says, "What a beautiful story. I learned so much from these sessions. Please, could you tell me, when sensing the vibration of visiting spirits, do they wish to communicate at this point?"
Um, our loved ones in the spirit world always wish to communicate with us. So the answer to that is yes. And what you need to do, and any of you out there who are listening, what we need to do is to always try to stay open, try to trust, to know that our loved ones in the spirit world will never hurt us. They are only there to help and to steer and to guide us. When we are doing our webinar, which I'm getting very excited about, and I'm going to be giving messages from the spirit world. When we're doing that, when we're doing more and more of that, as we will be doing more and more of that, I hope to give you many examples of how our loved ones in the spirit world are beside us, how they're watching us, how they're watching over us, and how they are in fact guiding us. And sometimes I'm sure as you watch me work and as you watch me give messages, and if you're lucky enough to get a message, as you get a message through these sessions, I think that, you know, you will find the trust and the faith that it might be a little bit shaky right now. So we're looking forward to that. But always try to listen to those in the spirit world, because they're always around you and always wanting to connect with you. Yes, Chris.
Marlene says, "When this man passed, did he meet with the people he killed? I'm imagining him meeting with all of them as they welcome him into the spirit world."
Um, that's a really good question. And the answer is I actually don't know, because I did not go with him. And my job was to ease him, to help him to find peace. My job was to give him healing. My job was to heal his soul. I did my job, and then then the angels will do theirs. God will do his. The universe will do its job. So I don't ever try to go deeper into that. It's not my business after all. But it is a curiosity, and I do understand why you're asking this question. And wouldn't that be something? Um, I'm sure that I'm sure that he would be met with people who love him and who care about him, and I'm sure that he would be embraced by the light. Chris.
Vicky said, "This is one of Rosemary's gifts to me, being unafraid of death."
Well, I'm glad. I'm so glad, Vicky. You know, it's. I think, to be honest, let's be really honest about this. I think when the time comes, people say to me all the time, "Are you afraid of death?" And, and if I'm honest, I'm not. I'm, I would say no, but I think my fear of death would be more concerning leaving my daughter and leaving my grandson. That would be my biggest fear. I don't think the fear is whatever's going to happen when I get over there. My fear will be if they would manage without me, because we have a very, very close and a very strong connection. So my fear would be for them and for the pain that they're going to have to go through when finally it is my turn. Um, Chris,
Betta says, "Hello, Rosemary.
hi,
Uh,
Beta.
on Saturday afternoon, or one Saturday afternoon with you is more cheerful. That blouse looks great on you. All my family greet you. A
Oh,
special
thank you.
greeting also to Grey Eagle."
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad I make you Saturday because, we love it, don't we, Chris?
Absolutely.
We always
Maggie
want to go ahead.
Maggie says, in a laughing way, "Rosemary, I am so with you. I once saw a bulletin outside a church and it read, 'This is your final test.' And I looked up to God and said, 'I really suck at tests. Does classroom work count?'"
I like that. I love that, Maggie. Thanks for that. You do make me laugh.
Yes, she does. Josephine has a question.
Yes, Josephine.
Can you give any clues as to how we can know whether our physical pain is primarily emotional, like the man in your story?
Well, if I were with you, if I were giving you healing, or if I were doing my thing, yes, of course. I mean, as soon as I sat down on with this man on his bed, I was very aware of the emotional traumas. Of course, having had a little clue when the doctors and the specialists have all gone over him and over him and over him and given him so many tests and can't find anything wrong, you sort of do get, you can guess that maybe this is more than a physical thing. Having said that, sometimes I've sat down with patients and the doctor could find nothing at all wrong. And it's amazing what the spirit world can tell you. And we can find that little issue, that little problem that is the culprit. And it's funny how sometimes my patients will go to the doctor and say, "Could you check out so and so for me?" And the doctor, "Well, why are you asking?" "Yeah, but can you just do it?" And so we're able to see very often those physical things that no matter how many tests you have, they can't find the issue. I remember I like to feel that I'm responsible for well, I'm actually responsible for triplets. I'm responsible for twins. I'm responsible for many babies in a weird way, because the amount of patients that I've had over the years who they have had tests, they've been told they can't have babies, they, one thing and another. There's a wonderful, wonderful lady in England. I don't know if she's listening this morning. She'll know who she is, who came to me desperate for a baby, and she'd been trying for several years. And every time she came to me, I said, "Look, that doesn't matter what you do, what you say, what anybody else says. I see babies, plural, babies." And one day, after this went on for several years, one day I actually got a phone call from this lady's mother shouting at me, really yelling at me, "Stop giving her false hope. She keeps trying and trying. She's trying one method after the other, and you're not helping at all. And you need to stop giving my daughter false hope." Now, I could see where she was coming from, and I could understand the anger, but at the same time, so, the daughter found out what her mother had done and came to see me, and she apologized, and I said, "Look, I'm not in the business of false hope, but I'm also not in the business of telling you what I can see or don't see, and I see babies." And I think it was maybe several months after that she actually, amazingly, surprisingly, shocking to everybody else, uh, found out that she was pregnant, and later ended up with triplets, and then opened a school for her boys and for the other kids in the village. And I can remember coming home. I drove home, pulled into the garage, and there was this enormous bouquet of flowers with a big uh, thing on them saying thank you, thank you, thank you, and it's finally happened. And I just smiled to myself. Even though sometimes we think that things are impossible, they're not, and sometimes things are really impossible, and we have to deal with those issues as well. But can we see what is the emotional as opposed to the physical? Absolutely. Yes, we can.
We have 5 minutes left, Rosemary.
Okie dokie.
And on that subject, Cheryl says, no, skipping. I'll come back to you, Cheryl. On that subject, Shaz says, beautiful story. Thanks for sharing, Rosemary. I have a question. Do you or Gray Eagle see children in my life someday?
Oh, I had a big yes from Grey Eagle there. Even before Chris had finished asking the question, I had a whooshing yes. So don't give up, my lovely. Yep.
Cheryl's question, why does God allow bad things to happen?
Well, that's a really great question, Cheryl. And it is amazing to me, and it might be amazing to you when I finish talking to you. Why are we blaming God for our actions? Because our actions create reactions. And if if we as human beings hadn't built cars or aeroplanes, then there would be no accidents, would there? If people didn't get into cars drunk driving, then there would be no accidents. If sort of people lived quiet, peaceful lives in the country, I don't know, would there be accidents? Of course there would. It's our human condition. But we need to stop blaming God for these things, because God, there's this idea from some people have this idea of God sitting there pointing the finger saying, right, today it's your turn and tomorrow it's your turn and you better watch out and what have you. I don't think it's God that allows things to happen. I think that because the world has been created the way it is, and because we have, created all of these situations for our own selves, I think that things happen which have absolutely nothing to do with God. And there is no such thing as death. There is no such thing as dying. And those bad things that do happen sometimes are necessary for us. Weirdly, I'm saying this, necessary for us, because pain and hurt and tears are our greatest gift. Now, having said that, I'm not going to say that I haven't said the same thing. Why did God allow these children to suffer? Why did God let this happen and that happen? But the reality is that usually it's not up to God. It's up to the decisions that people make and the actions and the reactions that people make choices about.
All right, we have a time for one last question from Sharu. Hello, Rosemary. A friend passed away on the 3rd of March. Is there any message? Thank you.
I would love to say yes, but I'm not hearing anything at the moment. I'm not hearing anything from Grey Eagle. I'm not hearing anything from anyone. So I'm going to say no at this moment in time. There is not. But please don't give up and don't stop trying. As I've said, we will be doing our seminars where we will be talking to the dead who we know are not dead at all. But I will be with Greg, will be making contact with those in the spirit world and giving messages. So maybe that is a forum that you might like to be interested in attending. But don't give up. Just because I don't hear anything right now doesn't mean that there's nothing to hear. Chris.
All right. Darinka is along the same venue. Is there any message for me today? I send you a hug and many blessings.
Thank you. As I've said, unfortunately, we're about to close. I know Chris has things to do, and I actually have things to do. So unfortunately, you can't, try if you want these questions, try if you can to ask these questions early on. It's no good asking 5 minutes to 12 or 2 minutes to 12 for these questions, because we are actually closing down. I do hope that you all enjoyed my story today. I do hope that this story was inspirational, because even though it might seem that it's a story of a horrible story, it is a story of healing, and it is a story of God's grace. It is a story of God and the light and our angels, and it is hopefully an inspirational story for all of you. So I thank you all for joining us for our story time this morning. We will be back on next Thursday, with The Spirit World Sees All, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Times. In other words, you'll find us exactly where you found us this morning. Do please share if you've enjoyed this little show that we have here. Please do share with your friends. Please do share with all of your Facebook friends. We are trying to use the hashtag, okay? So we're asking all of you, when you write in your questions, when you write your email to us, and if you want to be on our list, and if you want to be one of the first to know when our webinars are taking place, and when our webinar Talking with the Spirit World is going to take place, if you are on our mailing list, you will get there straight away. You will be the first. You'll be an insider. You'll get the inside scoop. Excuse me. So if you're on our mailing list, you will be an insider, which means that we will be doing this first come, first serve. We expect to have a lot of people wanting to join in this webinar. And so, so again, go to our website, rosemaryaltea.com, and subscribe there, which will automatically put you on the mailing list, or email us Kris, Kris, at rosemaryaltea.com, and ask to be put on the mailing list, and that's exactly what we shall do. You will not be inundated with mail every single day, because that's not our way, but we do send out a newsletter every month, and what we're going to be doing and what we're going to be planning will be on that newsletter. So I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Oh yes, the hashtag. So when you connect with us, or when you are sharing, or when you are writing anything at all about this experience, wherever it is or whoever it is you are writing to, please, would you do this for us, please? We're asking you a big favor. Use the hashtag Voice of the Spirit World, because that's me. That's who I am. That's who I am known as. And if you use that hashtag, we want to see, it's a little bit of an experiment here that we're doing. We want to see how clearly that hashtag goes out and how many people connect with that hashtag. So please use that hashtag, which is the # Voice of the Spirit World. And we appreciate all of your help. I'd like to say thank you to Grey Eagle for being with us today. I'd like to say thank you, Kris, because you're doing a phenomenal job, and I love having you working in my office. And I would also like especially to thank all of you out there for joining me, and for all of your support and all of your loving comments and all of that other stuff that you give to us. And we shall hopefully see you next Thursday, and if not, next Saturday. We'll be back here next Saturday for story time again. As I've said, go to my website, rosemaryaltea.com. There are all sorts of stories there, and little clips and little videos, and lots of information there too. So in the meantime, please, all of you out there, have a very, very blessed rest of the day, and have a very blessed rest of the weekend, everybody.